Well, she's such a sweet dog. I'd say, you can describe Lily in a lot of ways, but I wouldn't call her sweet. Yeah, a diva. Happy Friday, Baylor College of Medicine and friends of Baylor. How exciting can it be? We've got both Valentine's Day and a Super Bowl. It doesn't get any better than this. Or you could say it doesn't get any worse than this. Really exciting news for us and Peter Hotez. The World Health Organization gave emergency approval to the COVID-19 vaccine that was developed here by Peter Hotez at Baylor College of Medicine called Corbevax. If you'll recall, we've talked about this before. Peter, Baylor College of Medicine, Texas Children all collaborate to produce this vaccine, and we licensed it freely to BioE in India. And in December 2021, the Drug Controller General of India gave emergency use authorization for adults and later green-lighted it for adolescents and as well as a booster. This vaccine actually costs $1.95 or 145 rupees per dose. And there have been over 100 million doses in India alone. And so this is another endorsement by the WHO for its efficacy and will be used in many, many different countries. So congratulations to Peter for doing it, and it's part of Baylor College of Medicine trying to provide health for the world. Speaking of vaccines and people who are not following the rules, there have been multiple outbreaks of measles, and the CDC has now warned that clinicians need to be prepared to see patients who show up with measles because it's been a long time. And so, people who have measles show up with rhinitis, they're coughing, they have redness in their eyes, and people don't always recognize it. I call it a common cold, but it's actually seriously, it's in measles. It can be measles, and so clinicians need to be prepared for that. Cases have been reported in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware, and Washington. Almost all of these cases all of the cases are in unvaccinated people, and kids generally, who are exposed to people who've traveled abroad. So there's a lot more measles worldwide. If someone comes back and you're not vaccinated, the kid's not vaccinated, then they're likely to show up, or they can show up with acute measles. And just so everyone remembers, cough, coryza, inflammation of the mucous membranes, it could be confused with a cough or cold or hay fever. So anyway, that's really important. If you wonder who's protected, if you've received, for kids age in the K through 12 age range, if you receive 2 vaccines, or adults who are in high-risk areas, so adults who are post-high school and educational institutions at colleges and things like that, healthcare personnel and international travelers, you need to have had 2 doses. If you received 1 dose, you're probably okay if you're not in a high-risk group. The other way is if you've gotten a laboratory confirmation that you have antibodies to measles, and if you were born before 1957. This is the only good thing about being born before 1957. You almost certainly had measles, mumps, and rubella. Everybody caught it back then, and so if you're born before then, you're probably protected. So do you need to get one? If you fall into those groups, you don't need to get a measles vaccine, but if you haven't, and you have children, please get your measles vaccines. There's a really interesting New York Times guest essay that came up, and this actually came up. I was meeting with some people, and this came up in a discussion. There's been a lot of talk about anxiety disorders in the United States, and we have more anxiety disorders than almost any other country. This was we lead European Union by about a good 0.5% to 1%, and it's only gotten worse during COVID. And a lot of people have attributed this to loneliness. But if you actually look at loneliness as a separate risk factor, there's not a lot of good evidence that people are actually lonelier. In fact, there was a University of Michigan survey that showed that in older adults from 2018 to 2023, there was significantly less lonely. There was a paper in Gerontology that looked at middle-aged Americans, so they were significantly less lonely, and a Gallup poll showed the same thing. So if you look at generally, loneliness is decreased, and yet anxiety is at its highest. And what this Eric Kleinenberg, who's a professor of sociology at NYU, discussed in this essay, I thought was actually pretty interesting. What he said basically was loneliness isn't the problem for the anxiety disorder, but what happened through COVID is that people had the sense they had been left to navigate alone. So, how do you balance the demands of health, job, and family? Where do you get tests, masks, medicine for it? What do you do when your kids are at home because of the schools closing and yet you have to work? And people generally felt that they were left to figure it out for itself. And that's exactly, I met with a group of retirees, they sort of voiced the same exact thing. It's like they felt like no one was helping them, which is exactly the reason why we do these videos and why my sister says I have to keep doing them. Anyway, let's go through the data. Mostly it's good. The respiratory diseases are beginning to drop out as it's seasonal and it's getting towards February and March. We'll see a decline. You can see that all of them, COVID, influenza, RSV are declining. The good news is hospitalizations for COVID are finally beginning to decrease. And if you look at the hospitalizations over time, look at the difference between Omicron, which was last winter, and the JN1 variant. It went up during the winter as we suspected, but nowhere near what Omicron did. So that's good. And that's probably because we have an effective vaccine, and most people have been exposed to one of these coronavirus, either vaccine or the virus itself, multiple times, so there's some immunity. If you look at where the hospital admission rates are going in the United States, it's just a smattering. There's no particular regional pattern. It's just where there's a lot of virus around, and it's where people are sensitive to the virus. If you look at wastewater data, we've talked a lot about this. We had a special on it last week, Tony Morisso's group. Wastewater sites in the United States are reporting an increase. It's up about 43%. It was 32% just about a month ago. But it's sporadic, as you saw in the hospitalization, and all of that is being driven by JN1. If you look at how JN1 started just in November and now is 93% of the virus, it shows you dramatically how one more infectious virus can totally outcompete the others. And it's, it avoids the immunity, and it also has some infectious advantages. I mentioned that new influenza is also improving. Influenza hospitalizations are down. If you look at influenza mortality, it's been about the same. Usually it's the same when you have an influenza season each year. We often, physicians are referred to it as like the gift of the elderly. That's it because influenza does cause pneumonia in the elderly, and it's very often mortality stays about the same. It hasn't really changed in virulence. This year, as you can see, influenza A in yellow was the predominant strain, influenza B also present. And as we've talked about before, the Yamagata strain, which is an influenza B strain, seems to have disappeared. That probably happened with all the masking and prevent the flu season that was so small in 2019 and 2020. The flu season this year is about the same as we've had. Here's the red line showing our laboratory confirmed influenza hospitalizations. This blue line is 2019, 2020. 2014, 2015 was this other line above it. So it's falling right between sort of a standard influenza hospitalization year. RSV is also beginning to fall down, which is great. So that's all good. So a couple of scientific things that were interesting. We talked about the importance of pregnant mothers getting vaccinated because it not only protected them, but it protected their babies. Well, there was a study in Nature Communication that looked at infants who were born to COVID-infected mothers and looked at the risk of respiratory distress. And this was, the point of this was even in babies born that did not get infected, when the mother was infected, they had a very strong inflammatory response, and there was a significant increase in the number of severe infections or severe response in the babies. So the babies were hospitalized. 16% of the mothers had a severe COVID versus 4% of the vaccinated mothers, so 16% that were unvaccinated versus 4%. And of those, 17% of the exposed infants had respiratory distress compared to 5%. And this is even in babies who are not infected. So this just shows the inflammatory response by being infected is particularly detrimental to the baby. And of course, my favorite thing is to look at the many, many different animals that can be infected in the world. And so we keep adding to potential reservoirs. I mean, bats are fine. We know about white-tailed deer. There was the hamster in China. There was the rabbit, one dog. We don't know about those cats in Crete, in Greece. But anyway, there is a report that a beaver farm in 2021 had 32 adult beavers and 16 kits. By the way, if you ever want to know what a baby beaver is, it's a kit. So 16 kits all tested were positive for COVID. And interestingly enough, they infected one farm employee. And they did this by sequencing. There's the beaver floating around, and these were the sequences that showed that they actually infected one of the handlers. So add beavers to the new reservoirs. And this is an interesting study. Because of white-tailed deer, a bunch of veterinarians did a study where they actually infected elk and mule deer to see if they could sustain an infection. And it turns out that elk are pretty resistant, but mule deer can be infected. So stay away from mule deer, white-tailed deer, beavers, and mink. Remember mink. Okay, want to end today with a bunch of shout-outs. First of all, congratulations to Dr. Marty Matzik. He's the chair of pathology and immunology and director of the Center for Drug Discovery. He received the Hill Prize in Medicine from TAMIS, the Texas Academy of Medicine, Engineering, Science, and Technology. This is given each year to 5 categories and recognize exceptional innovators. He won because he's developed a small molecule inhibitor that can be used to treat endometriosis, and it's non-steroidal. So a really huge opportunity, great discovery, and we hope it works. It's in clinical trials. Also, congratulations to Dr. David Hilmers, professor of medicine at Baylor, who will be inducted into the 2024 United States Astronaut Hall of Fame at the Kennedy Space Center. He was in the U.S. Marines and was selected as an astronaut in 1980. He's a veteran of 4 space flights and has logged more than 493 hours in space. After retiring from NASA in 1992, he completed his medical degree and residency here at Baylor College of Medicine, and he joined the faculty. A Baylor College of Medicine banner flew with Dr. Hilmer's last space flight and is on display at the DeMakey Library and Museum. I mean, how cool is that? Doesn't get any cooler than that. Also, last week I was at our Temple campus for a site visit for one of our accrediting organizations. My thanks to all the members of the education administrative team from Houston and Temple that organized and facilitated the site visit. As a result of all of your detailed preparation, we received an outstanding review. And thanks to all of you, and thank you to the medical students. We're very excited about our Temple campus. And so that's congratulations to everybody. A shout out also to D. Young in Tampa, who I am told manages my Florida club. Thanks for sharing the videos with your friends, and a big thank you for doing that. And also a big thank you to the Ventures Club at Memorial Drive Presbyterian Church that invited me to their February dinner meeting to give some medical updates and answer some questions. It was a lot of fun. I'm expecting another invitation, by the way. I heard next week somebody from the rodeo is coming. And finally, of course, many of you will be watching the big game this weekend. Some will tune in just for the commercials. That'll be me, because I couldn't care less about who wins the game. And others will be making final plans for Valentine's Day. Lily is going to do a bit of everything. And whatever your plans are, have fun and be sure to watch Lily's video this week. All right, everybody, have a great weekend, and I can't wait to see you next week.
Go long!
Second down and 10. Oh, what a hit. One single down.